The air in the room wasn't just still. It had a texture, a thick, damp quality that coated the back of his throat with the taste of old dust and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet. Then came the sound. A wet, rhythmic scratching from the other side of the door, like something was methodically trying to dig its way through the wood. His muscles locked. A primal dread taking hold that had nothing to do with thought and everything to do with the scent of ozone and rot now seeping through the cracks. The creature wasn't hungry for food or thirsty for water. Its needs were far more fundamental and infinitely more horrifying. It fed on the very essence of life, on the warmth, the breath, the quiet hum of a living mind, leaving behind only a cold, hollow shell. And in that suffocating silence, broken only by the relentless scratching and his own hitched breaths, he realized the absolute minimum a body needs to survive isn't sustenance. It's the simple, terrifying privilege of being left alone. Hope, a single work boot, discarded and half submerged in the muck. Nearby, a rusted saw blade gleams dully in the weak light. For 17 days, one man discovered the horrifying answer. He wasn't lost on a mountain or adrift at sea. He was deep in the Oregon wilderness. His only source of food became a lumberjack's darkest nightmare. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fresh-cut pine, a smell that turned sickly sweet with hunger. And all the while, a low, unsettling drone began to hum beneath the silence of the woods. And why, when they found him, the doctor said he wasn't the hardest part to believe. Our story begins on a sun-dappled suburban street in Portland, Oregon. Meet James Miller, a structural engineer, laughing with his wife Anna and their 2 young children at a backyard barbecue. The air smelled of charcoal and cut grass. A perfect, ordinary summer day. He was a man who made his living solving problems, his logic methodical, his presence a bedrock for his wife Anna and their children. To his friends, he was the stable one, the type who would check the forecast twice before planning a simple picnic. But beneath that careful surface, in the quiet hours, a different kind of problem began to form. It was a problem that smelled of damp earth and ozone, that came not with a shout, but with a persistent, whispering scratch from within the walls of his own home. But stability proved a fragile illusion. A single failed investment, a silent partner who vanished into the ether, began the cascade. The scent of stale coffee and paper dust hung in the stagnant air as everything unraveled. Ruin arrived not with a crash, but with the silent, suffocating weight of collapse. Debts piled like a tomb around him, and the whispers began, not just from collectors, but from within his own mind. Failure burdened, the words coiled in his thoughts, cold and damp as a cellar. James, always the problem solver, had crafted a dilemma with no escape. Now it clung to him, a sticky, suffocating weight that whispered of ruin. He told Anna it was just a temporary cash flow issue, a lie that tasted like rust on his tongue. He whispered to himself that he'd find a way out alone, the damp air clinging to his skin. After a long moment, he placed the photo back with a finality that echoed in the quiet room. On a crisp October morning, he told Anna he was heading to a week-long forestry conference near Silverton. He called it a networking opportunity, but the lie was flimsy, a brittle thing his wife believed because it was so unlike him. After kissing his children goodbye, James drove east, leaving the city's sodium glow for the dense, towering woods of the Willamette National Forest. The air grew heavy and damp, smelling of wet earth and something else, a faint, coppery tang that clung to the back of the throat. Each mile deeper into the woods felt like a layer of the civilized world was being stripped away, leaving only the raw, watchful silence of the ancient trees. He wasn't traveling to any conference. This journey had a far darker purpose. His destination was the heart of the deep woods, where a grim plan waited to be executed. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay as the fog swallowed the road behind him. Every crunch of gravel under the tires felt like a countdown, a final approach into the gloom. James pitched his small, cheap tent near a logging clearing, his basic survival kit, small hatchet, and pot his only companions. His plan was simple, and in his fractured mental state, it seemed perfectly rational. He would disappear. He had brought only enough food for 3 days, a deliberate, stark limitation. The air carried the damp scent of pine and soil, and every rustle in the undergrowth seemed amplified in the growing dark. He would forage, maybe hunt, letting the world believe he'd vanished. The life insurance policy, the last one intact, would pay out for Anna and the children, a final solution, carried out in the cold, damp silence of the woods. His final act of provision, executed with a metallic scent of determination hanging in the air. Desperation turned James' stomach as the last rations vanished. His clumsy snares yielded nothing but frustration. He found a cluster of dark berries and devoured them, ignoring the bitter aftertaste that clung to his tongue. Within minutes, violent cramps seized his abdomen, doubling him over as a cold sweat broke across his skin. Then the rain began. A relentless, icy drizzle that seeped through his clothes and carried the scent of wet earth and decay. But the forest is not a gentle place. The strange berries churned in his gut with a sickening, acidic burn. The forest offered no forage, just an endless, empty stillness beneath the downpour. The relentless rain was a cold thief, stealing every last shred of warmth and clarity from his mind. Then, with a final, pathetic sputter, his high-tech water filter gave out. On day 4, the engineer's hunger transformed into a feral entity, its sharp-toothed, gnawing, carving hollows beneath his ribs. His logical mind was being dismantled by the wilderness's illogical chaos, each rustle in the dark chipping away at his reason. Then he stumbled into a clearing, an old logging site where fresh wood chips lay in piles, their resinous scent cutting through the forest rock. The sawdust was still damp to the touch, sticky with sap, and the air carried the metallic whisper of a recent blade. His eyes fell upon a massive, unnatural mound of yellow pine sawdust. This was no sustenance. It held no nourishment. It was filler. The realization settled in his gut like a cold, dense stone. Pure, deceptive filler, masquerading as something it could never be. The residue of ruin. To his famished mind, it formed a grotesque logic. It was organic matter. It would occupy the hollow void within him. Maybe it could trick his stomach. Just for a little while. The first mouthful was an act of pure psychological surrender. It was like chewing on bitter, splintered chalk. The coarse fibers scraped his throat, each swallow a raw, grinding protest. The dust caught his throat, dry and choking. He mixed it with rainwater in his pot, creating a cold, gruel-like paste. Swallowing was agony, each gulp scraping raw. But the cramping in his stomach lessened. For an hour or two, the phantom of fullness haunted him. Then, the ghost of that feeling fled, leaving only the deep, gnawing ache of his true reality. James retreated to his tent, a shivering specter in his own life. The damp cold of the ground seeped into his bones, and the only sound was the faint, wet rasp of his own breathing. Every evening, as the rain fell, he'd scoop sawdust into his palm. He'd mix it with rainwater in a chipped bowl, creating a foul, gritty paste. With a shudder, he'd swallow the concoction, his face contorting in pure revulsion. Then, he'd curl into a tight, shivering ball on the floor, the ritual complete. His journal, found later, contained only sparse, desperate entries. He scrawled, "For Anna," on the wall, the charcoal smearing like a dark promise. Day 11. A numb, dead weight had replaced his feet. He tried to eat the sawdust. It tasted of dry, splintered wood and despair. The absurdity of it struck him, and a weak, broken laugh escaped his lips before the crushing weight of his reality slammed back down. Sawdust and rainwater filled the air with a damp, earthy scent. His body began consuming itself, muscle wasting away into hollow shadows. His mind, however, embarked on its own journey through the decaying corridors of memory. Whispers of forgotten voices scratched at the edges of his consciousness. His waking dreams were vivid, visceral things. The sizzle of a steak, the crisp scent of an apple, the warmth of a family dinner. He would wake with the taste of splinters coating his tongue, a gritty, woody residue that felt like a punishment. The line between providing for his family and inflicting torment upon himself dissolved into nothing. He had become both the one who makes the offering and the thing laid upon the altar. Day 17. The tent lay collapsed, a broken shell in the mud beside a sluggish stream. James was sprawled beside it, emaciated and caked in drying filth, his clothes hanging off his skeletal frame like rags. The air hung thick with the scent of wet earth, rot, and a faint, coppery tang of something else. His only movement was the shallow, ragged pull of air into his lungs, each breath a monumental effort against a crushing, unseen weight. On the 17th day, James Miller was no longer an engineer. He was a biological experiment, clinging to a precipice. His kidneys had begun to fail, a deep, grinding ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. His digestive tract was shredded, a raw agony from consuming the wrong kind of fiber in his desperate hunger. Each shallow breath tasted of dust and decay, the only sound his own ragged gasps in the oppressive stillness. Too weak to gather sawdust, he lay there drinking rainwater from a puddle, waiting for his chosen end. The metallic tang of rust and damp earth filled his senses as the cold seeped into his bones. Then, a sudden sharp bark shattered the stillness. A beam of light swept across James's face, cutting through the darkness. Voices crackled through the radio. Man's voice. "Hey, over here! My God! Call it in!" Ranger Mike and his search dog had found James purely by chance. Mike wasn't looking for him. He was investigating illegal dumping when he discovered a figure that resembled a famine victim more than a man. Paramedics loaded James into the ambulance, a wraith with hollow eyes that held no recognition. The air inside the vehicle carried the scent of antiseptic and something faintly metallic. At Salem Hospital, the medical team stood frozen, their professional composure shattered by what lay before them. The monitor screamed impossibility, vitals utterly incompatible with life. Yet his awareness was a stark, undeniable presence in the sterile room. A doctor leaned in, the scent of antiseptic giving way to something dry and ancient. When asked what he'd consumed, his reply was a papery rustle of sound. Sawdust. Just the sawdust and the rain, he kept repeating. But they dismissed it as trauma-induced delusion. That changed when they pumped his stomach. A damp, woody scent of decay filled the sterile room, thick and cloying. The air grew heavy. The only sound, the steady drip from the basin's edge onto cold steel. Inside, A sodden, fibrous mass of macerating wood pulp. The evidence was irrefutable. A stomach filled with pulverized timber. Dr. Sarah Chen later described it as the most profound act of sheer, stubborn will to survive she had ever witnessed. His body was failing, yet some fractured part of his mind clung desperately to the mechanics of his plan. Survive. For them, James believed his descent into madness was an act of salvation. Months later, the truth emerges in Anna's quiet interview. Her composure, a fragile mask. The air in the room feels thick, heavy with the scent of old grief and lingering ozone. Her voice, when it comes, is a raw whisper that scrapes against the silence. He thought he was saving us. He believed himself to be the debt that required erasure. But he failed to comprehend his true nature. He was the equity, the sole element of significance in this grim equation. The air thickened with the scent of ozone and decay, as if reality itself protested this revelation. A primal dread took hold, freezing him in place as distant whispers scratched at the edges of his consciousness. Post. James survived. Physically, he recovered, though his digestive system would never be the same. Psychologically, the road stretched far longer into the dark. The guilt, the shame, the surreal memory of those 17 days. They were his now, a permanent gnawing rot within. 17 days of self-cannibalization, a truth his mind could never fully digest. The camera lingers on the abandoned, muddy clearing in the woods, where a single, sun-bleached pile of sawdust lies like a forgotten grave marker. The air here feels thick with damp decay, carrying the faint, metallic scent of old rain on rusting tools. James Miller's story tells us that survival isn't measured in calories or protein. It's measured in having a reason to endure. Even a broken, devastating, misguided reason. His love for his family was the seed. His shame was the water, a cold, stagnant dampness that seeped into everything. His despair was the sawdust. It filled the air he breathed, gritty and choking. Together, they fed something monstrous in the dark. From that toxic recipe, he somehow forged the will to endure a horror of his own making. He walked into those woods to disappear, to become less than a memory. Yet there, he performed one of the most brutal acts of survival ever recorded. Ask yourself tonight, what's the sawdust in your life? That thing you're consuming? The sawdust in your mouth? The metallic tang on your tongue? It isn't nourishment, but you've convinced yourself it's keeping you alive. And what or who are you really surviving for? The answer lies in the growing pile in the corner, the proof of what you've become.